అడిగినా చేంజ్ చేస్తాను. న్యూ మేనేజ్మెంట్ కదా ఇప్పుడు.
Yep, that kid right there is me. And it doesn't look like it, with his face buried in the carpet and his butt sticking out in the air. But that kid would have some dreams to grow up and try to see the world. And now that I'm a little bit more grown up and have a little bit more money, I was hoping to do that. I've always wanted to travel to Patagonia, and after graduating from college and being in between things right now, I figured now was a good time. And I also wanted to show people that you don't have to go to Europe to have a good time. But in all seriousness, it's been a dream to see some of the scenery there, and this is just some of what I experienced while I was there. So, hope you guys enjoy. I started off in Santiago, thinking my arrival right at sunrise over the Andes was an auspicious start. But I ended up getting off the bus at the wrong stop, so I ended up walking an hour to my hostel. But it didn't matter, because I started getting a sense of what the vibe was. I think Santiago, well, from the trustworthy account of someone who spent 36 hours there, is a city of cathartic beauty. Beauty that's unafraid to be expressed, and it expresses itself with a purpose, from some type of deeper passion from within. And you could see that passion in the street art around the city. Every block was a canvas to some type of vibrant mural or political slogan. I thought it was poetic that one of the side streets I meandered down led to the Chilean Museum of Human Rights, a memorial to the victims who were either lost or killed, or both, by the Chilean military dictatorship of Pinochet in the 70s and the 80s. The military destabilized a weak but democratically elected socialist government with covert US involvement backing this junta. And during this time period, the dictatorship took many political prisoners, many of whom were just guilty of being activists, artists, and academics. With over 3,000 known murders, it was a deadly time period, but there's still so many people that are unaccounted for. The most gut-wrenching thing for me was discovering all the objects that the political prisoners left behind for their families, not knowing if they had ever received them. Many letters and postcards, but also pieces of art, such as hand-woven bags and purses, and one prisoner left behind a hand-carved wooden chess set. I wonder how many Chilenos today are connected to this national trauma, just so recent. But I feel like this motivates the current period of unfiltered expressiveness I could see just walking through the city. Art and music flourished on every corner, and there seems to be a proud audaciousness amongst the young people, a mood of we belong here, no matter what you think. Santiago reminded me that you can take away someone's rights, but you'll never take away the human desire to create something, especially if you have nothing left. My next destination was the national park, Torres del Paine, the Towers of Paine. But to get there, I had to take a flight into Punta Arenas, then a bus into Puerto Natales, and another bus into the national park. I think at this point, I started feeling the anxiety that came with traveling alone. I wouldn't say that I was unraveling, but I felt burdened, which was a troubling sign to see right at the start. I found myself in a cycle of non-stop movement, a mechanical routine of packing and unpacking, arriving at terminals so early, and a dizzying preparation for a task I quickly realized I'd never done before, camping in a foreign country alone. I found myself in a state of apprehension about the next thing I had to do. But this is where the simple joys of solo traveling came into fruition. The big one, making friends with strangers. I spent a day in Santiago, exploring with Malina and Danilo, two Brazilians, and Ivan, a Colombian guy. I felt so proud that I could hang with them entirely in Spanish, and we bridged any gaps with elaborate hand gestures and Google Translate. We shared drinks and food, as well as talking about cultural differences and experiences. They were fascinated by me being an Indian American who knew Spanish, and I also found that sharing the story about my background would come to be a source of pride for me when I met other people. In Punta Arenas, I met a guy named Mark who left quite the impression on me. He was an English literature teacher from Ireland, so naturally we talked about some of the books we'd been reading. He told me about the high standing of Irish education as an institution of respect in the country, and we talked about the importance of enforcing your values and standards in relationships, something I think about almost daily with my friendships back home. I think I walked away feeling inspired because I saw a lot of what I hoped to be in him, an infectious positivity, an entrenched value for the relationships in your life, and a non-stop love of talking. In his words, I could make conversation with a concrete wall. But the other thing that quenched my anxiety, it's just simply coming to Patagonia. Like, the things they say about how beautiful this place is are all so true. If you're the type of person who can appreciate the beauty of nature, this is the place that will send you spiraling with an unrestrained gratitude for everything and for just life itself. It was unbelievable. I arrived right as fall was cementing its hold on the greenery of the cities and the landscapes. I learned there that the signature tree of Patagonia is the deciduous beech tree, called a lenga in Spanish. Although not the tallest, the provocative warmth of the colors they put on left me with just as much awe as the redwoods and the sequoias of California. But more importantly, this scenery reminded me of the calming humility that nature can plant in you, wherever in the world you are. Because I realized that the anxiety I was feeling was due to a lack of control over things I wouldn't have had a second thought about back home. But the moments of joy I had in these first few days came from a spontaneous decision, a lack of thought. Sitting down with Molina for breakfast led to one thing. Asking Mark to get dinner with me led to another. And then just wandering aimlessly through the fall foliage led to these thoughts I'm now sharing. I just needed to trust myself to do the things I wanted to do in that moment. But I just hoped that I'd be able to keep this mindset going. I also had my sketchbook, my books, and my photography. So there was a lot to take my mind off of things for now. But I actually ended up asking my friends this question. If you had everything you needed to occupy yourself, how long could you be alone for? Before you started craving human interaction. But now it was time for me to start my backpacking trip in Torres del Paine. I'd never been such an outdoorsy person until I got to college, but camping became the source of my social circle as well as my main hobby. But backpacking takes it to the next level. I wouldn't call myself a knowledgeable backpacker. I really only went on these trips because it was a cheap time with friends. I couldn't tell you what the optimal food intake is. I just eat enough to not go to bed hungry. And I don't know the most efficient way to pack your bag, apart from putting the heavier stuff on the bottom. I simply see it as a means to an end, and maybe that's why people put up with it. Even though your shoulders are aching, and your hips are bruised, and your feet are so blistered, you persevere because you want to experience the most pristine form of nature. And while doing so, you're just left in this constant state of amazement. I saw sights of nature I could never even begin to imagine. It felt like a Minecraft creative world, because you're surrounded by all the resources you could build a world with. Rolling hills flooded with an armada of beech trees, towering snow-capped spires and peaks in the distance, rivers deftly carving out the valleys with their ferocious roars, and then completing their expeditions into glacial lakes, where you have a shadow of the towering mountains cast over with such an ominous looming presence. I even saw an avalanche. At one point, though, these trips become a challenge of mental strength. I've learned a lot about myself that when it comes to a physical feat, I absolutely revel in the thrill of completing it. Even though I'm being mercilessly humbled by the miles of uphill, you just put one foot in front of the other. But just make sure to look up too. It gives me the chance to reflect on how thankful I am for the strength and energy I have in my youth, to be able to go to corners of the world that a lot of people can only dream of. But there's a side to backpacking I feel is glossed over sometimes, and it's kind of alienating. It's an expensive hobby to get into. Although compared to other trips, it's way cheaper, but your first trip will be expensive. Getting the right gear, the right food, reservations, whatever. But the bigger thing for me is this. I've rarely met people of color while backpacking. Often the only POC on the trails are my friends and myself. And while talking to a Chilean couple here as well, Sandra and Juan, I also learned that Chilenos tended to be a minority in the parks here as well, because they've been priced out by stagnating wages and rising tourism costs. I say all this because I want to describe a portrait for a hobby that I do care deeply about, which means sharing both the good and the ugly. So if you have a problem with it, you can click off now. But I want to end this part by saying that backpackers and campers are still some of the most humble and compassionate people I've ever met. I think it's a shared humility that we all tap into. We're all so humbled by nature, but we keep coming back to it. It's a testament to the willpower of these people. And this hobby has given me some of my closest friends and my best memories, so I can only be thankful. And I hope you've been enjoying these memories too. Remember that question I asked earlier? How long could you isolate yourself for? I'm a very social person, so I was beginning to test my abilities with this. There weren't many people in the park, as it was the off-season for them. But there was a point where I started to feel the loneliness. I remember that I felt it when I thought back to some of the goofy moments I shared with some of my friends on other trips. But I found ways to keep myself entertained. I vlogged bits of my day, low-key to hear the sound of my voice. I started beatboxing. I orated poetry out loud. I'd whip up some actually insane Spanish dialogues to practice. I had to cut myself off when I came up with a crazy story about his son killing his dad. I'm so sorry, it was all spontaneous. But I think the randomness of this speaks to an ability to harness my inner child by being literally entertained by anything. And walking, of course, was the best distraction. This, along with my pictures and my sketching, it gave me some routine. So I was able to ward off the loneliness. But there was one recurring thought that I latched onto. I can't believe I'm here. I think whenever I'm feeling overwhelmed, this is the best thing I could say to myself. To bring myself back to this moment. This life is so random and nothing is ever guaranteed. So just take each moment as it comes. I think you get that idea by now. I met a girl named Claire during this adventure who perfectly summarized the complex feelings I had. I asked her what she felt the biggest challenge of traveling alone was. She said that when you're alone, you find yourself wanting to be around people. But when you're with people, you realize that this isn't actually what you want. It's really straightforward, but after she said that to me, I'll never not think of it like that. It's such a fickle feeling. It changes like the emotions of a toddler. But being in solitude for a bit is how you embrace uncertainty within yourself. The more people you're around, the more you end up reflecting the characteristics of them. You lose a little bit of yourself. It's like how a wave of light changes direction and bounces around and goes all over the place when there are more and more objects in its path. You're that wave of light. But what happens when there's nothing to reflect and bounce off of? Then you're in control of your own light. You bear the chaos of the universe on your own. I'm not saying you need the solo travel to be alone. You could go to a cafe or something, or go on a hike, or just study alone. But I think a lot of young people, especially people my age, encounter this loneliness for the first time when graduating from college, when you're trying to carve a path out on your own, and it can feel suffocating. But being alone for a moment lets you reflect on what you, and only you, and your heart really want. Because I feel like I know more about what I'd like to leave as a legacy after thinking about it on my own. Because when you venture out into the world alone, there's no one who could filter out the truth about yourself that you're trying to find. As I was dozing off on the bus back from the park, back into civilization, I get a text from a friend I'd interned with. Dude, check your email. I just got my job offer rescinded. And to my dismay, I get an email saying that I'd just gotten laid off as well. I remember after getting past that initial shock, specifically thinking back to a conversation with someone in Santiago. She quit her job in banking to travel the world. But she felt inherently more appreciative of every opportunity to be there because she made such a big sacrifice. I thought of her in that moment because right then, I realized that was the energy I needed to harness as well. I actually moved on from it pretty quickly. After ranting to my dad that night, I realized that this could be an opportunity to do something new. But as I left Chile and crossed the border into the Patagonian steppes of Argentina, I now want to share the next chapter of this story for you. The Patagonian story of ice. Patagonia is a region of southern Chile and Argentina with such diverse geography. In this region you have vast Argentinian grasslands and deserts sprawling in the shadow of the Andes Mountains to the west. While on the other side you have the remnants of a glacial history in Chile, fjords and lakes peppering the countryside. And in the middle of all this, you have one of the world's biggest ice sheets, the southern Patagonian ice field, consisting of glaciers that serve as a sobering reminder of the Ice Age, when they used to completely blanket this land. And way down in the south, in Tierra del Fuego, you have the convergence of mountains, trees, beaches, and water all at one point. One of the most unique ecosystems in the world. In the way that people have a story, the land also has just as rich of a saga. The native people of Patagonia, some groups consisting of the Tehuelche, the Salkman, and the Yamanas, were the first to tame these lands and to lay a truce with the ice. They were so adept with fire, lighting fires everywhere, eventually giving rise to the name Tierra del Fuego when Spanish settlers encountered them. They also hunted animals such as guanaco and whales to use their fur and fat as protection from the cold. I became captivated with ice and all its variations over this trip. Moments like this glacier and experiencing my first ever snowfall really widened my perspective as a kid from Southern California. Ice is both rigidly cold, but flexibly shifting as it melts into water or as it flutters down from hazy clouds of snow. It can gracefully adorn a warm environment in the way it so delicately balances on the branches of the beech trees, or it can ring a menacing tone in the form of towering glaciers that occupy miles of space. Here's Perito Moreno, one of the largest glaciers in the southern hemisphere. The surface gives off a dehydrated texture, while jagged crevasses and ashy sediment layers take turns cutting up what was once a pristine surface. But regardless of the mood it creates, ice is always beautiful. Right now, we're in an interglacial period due to the wobble in Earth's orbit, where the Earth experiences more direct sunlight as a result. So during the last 10,000 years, the glaciers of Patagonia have retreated. I got the chance to explore the mountains of a hiking town in Argentina, El Chaltén, with some Europeans, and the lands of Tierra del Fuego with some Canadians I met. Lands that were once buried deep under a glacier thousands of years ago. Let that sink in for a bit. A lot of the ideas I've been rambling about aren't really anything original, but I've been trying to come up with unique metaphors to describe them. I think the metaphor of ice is fitting. The history of this land asks us if we're hiding anything for ourselves, underneath all these impenetrable layers of ice. What are some of the lies you disguise your own truths with? Because underneath those lies, there's so much beauty and wonder waiting to be dug out. So when the glacial recessions occur, there's going to be some unexpected changes left behind. But I hope we can all find the beauty in that. The beauty of Patagonia is a result of the extremes. The unrelenting frigidity of a snowy world melts away into illustrious days of warmth and serenity, with views of shimmering lagoons and rivers dotting the countryside. It's truly a wonder. Towards the end of my trip, I spent some time in the capital city, Buenos Aires. It became one of my favorite cities I'd ever visited, with such good food and friendly people. But never a place I'd want to move to, simply because of the feeling that comes of how it feels to be a stranger in another person's home. It fills me with so much respect for the people around the world who are navigating their own challenges of being a stranger. So I wanted to write a poem dedicated to all of that. 2 blocks down Junin, and then take a right. 3 blocks on Peña, but you take an extra left when you were going to take a right. And now you're on Juncal, looking up in agony at the towering brick walls, a revolving, spiraling sense of dread. When you acted with years of confident direction, to suddenly be at the mercy of your self-service detection. Your brow starts to furrow and your eyes begin thinning, as dismay becomes fear, slowly winning. Treading footsteps on cobblestone, but it still feels like water. Yet you make it to shore. For a cheap coffee, you'd have never bothered, with which you transfigure worry back into banal jitters, yet still a familiar feature until the mind creates the next scenario of outsiders looking in at a way of life never decreed for you. To be witnessed, scampering, unseen until someone sees you, and yet still unknowing. You're never indexed in their anthology, yet you try to ooze and squirm into spaces and the walls that you pay your respects to as they remind you of the boundaries that lay dormant but thunder. They thunder upwards with an imperious force when you try to cross. A stranger's life is defined by boundaries. Yet these boundaries never shut your eyes, so hungry for beauty in a world ready to donate color. Saturated greens lining the city blocks, and dusty reds and browns and muted beiges, evoking a hardy ashen character that speaks to your heart. a heart longing for the embrace of community, scenes of children screeching after balloons and giddy lovers toying at one another's hair, dogs roaming in curious droves, ironically humanizing a human who will only disappear. Some might say this stranger will be estranged from this land he was just passing through, an appearance so fleeting. Will people wonder, was he imagined? Yes, he was, as he's then forgotten. But the stranger will never forget the scenes he saw and the spaces he shared, the buses he bumped shoulders on. Because he's a stranger, so everything is strange to him. If you couldn't tell by these clips, I walked a shit ton. The cities of Argentina and Chile had a lot of European influences in their development, so all these cities were built on grids. So it was way easier for you to just walk and take public transit. I was so excited to add 2 more transit cards to my collection. Walking is also embedded in the culture of these cities. There were so many public green spaces, and it was common to see multiple generations of families strolling around and communities meeting together to play soccer or dance together. I think the best way to describe all the walking I did was that it was meditative. I found myself reflecting on everything, from childhood memories to recent conversations with friends at home. Walking around so much made it feel like I was on a field trip, like the ones where you go to a cultural center or a museum as a kid. I even went on a couple of walking tours to learn more about the city, which were honestly some of the highlights of my trip. By walking around, I learned about the history of the countries I went to. The repressive regimes of the 1970s and 1980s in Chile and Argentina, the disheartening history of the genocide committed by European settlers against native people in Patagonia, and the stories of the artists and architects who influenced the style of these cities. Stories that left me more appreciative of the homes I was walking through. It's one of the most humbling and unconstrained acts. It reflects the realization that you're not trying to place any controls on your life, because it forces you to slow things down and just observe what's happening around you. And in a world where the time to walk becomes more and more elusive, the privilege of being able to do so is so important to recognize, because it's the best thing you can do to build a stronger bond to whatever land you call home. But in some moments, it's also good to stop and sit still for a second and let your mind out for a walk as well. I've started letting my mind chase after dreams and visions I'd thrown away, because I was settling for something more comfortable. Now you're seeing one of these dreams play out in front of you with this video. I've asked my mind to begin fetching these dreams now, over and over again, to the point where it's a game that sustains me, to dream of something much grander than the mundane churnings of a typical life. In these moments where I sit still and replay all the endless possibilities in my head, the one that sticks out is a mad pursuit of the crazy dreams beyond the setting sun of the horizon, with a beckoning aura of rosy gold rays. And in my mind, I'm trying to sprint after these dreams, and the wind rushes past me, leaving behind lungs gasping for air, but also cathartic chills of my soul. And even if I don't make it in the moment, these dreams are gonna rise again tomorrow, for me to run after them again. Because I've seen how walking every day can lead to crazy dreams, and the stories of people, both past and present, who have all been chasing their dreams in some way. I met one of these dreamers who probably left the most emotional impression on me, for I felt like crying tears of happiness because of the pride I felt with how happy he was to finally be doing what he was doing.
Le quiero decir, sobre todo para la juventud, que aprovechen su vida, que disfruten su vida, que dediquen todo el tiempo que puedan a seguir sus sueños. Si no está en un lugar, puede estar en otro lugar, pero lo importante es salir a buscar el encuentro con uno mismo para después dar amor a los demás.
It was probably the most chance encounter of all. I was in the bus terminal in a town called El Calafate, and he was just sitting there in a dilapidated pile in the corner, tuning the strings of his weathered guitar. So I went up to him and asked him what his favorite song to play was. His name was Sebastian. He used to work in an IT department for a school district in the northeast of Argentina, but quit his job to wander and play music for people across the country. He had been playing guitar since he was young, and he shared some of his favorite styles. Traditional Argentinian folk music, and he played a specific style called vidala. The way he sang, it felt like he was channeling the voices of long-forgotten ancestors. He wanted just one last time for their voices to be heard. Sebastian reminded me about the independence you can feel, despite living off of scraps and the daily struggle that came with it. But you're chasing a dream, which is one of the most courageous things you can now do as a human. Chase after a dream. We bonded over discussions of culture, where I told him about my love for Indian food, promising to make it extra picante for him. I left my interaction with him feeling so much love and inspiration. I hope that one day we can cross paths again. This whole adventure reminds me of a popular book that my friend had gifted me before leaving, The Alchemist. It's about a boy who's on a quest to find treasure, simply put. He was a shepherd who had to leave his home to complete this quest, which is something the author describes as a personal legend. But along the way, he connected with other people who helped him out in various ways. But at one point, he had to complete his personal legend on his own, which is something the author says the majority of people go their whole lives without ever even trying to complete their personal legend. I hope that I'll be able to realize my personal legend. And it's soon to say I want to be able to, because I'm still 21, so I don't know what it is. And if you read the book, there's an unexpected thing that happens when the boy realizes his personal legend, which is something that excites me for my own life. All the unexpected possibilities that could happen. But now, my hope is turned into faith when it comes to chasing my dreams. I'm not going to reveal what they are to you, but I have the confidence to chase after them, which is something I don't think I could have said when I first dreamt these dreams. And now I've started walking, still aimlessly, but still in the right direction, because I know that at least I'm walking towards something. And one day I'll reach it, and then we'll see what happens next. If you've made it to the end of this, thank you so much. It means a lot. For someone who's just trying to express his creativity and his thoughts in some way. This whole video and this trip is about as directionless as my mind is at the moment, if that wasn't clear. But just being able to do it, and to be in Chile and Argentina, and experiencing all these moments with strangers from different corners of the world, fills me with so much gratitude and happiness for my youth. A youth that blesses me with the time to dream and the energy as well to pursue them. But it's a youth that's not related to age. I've found that people of all ages still have youth, in the sense that we're all still trying to find ways to creatively express a love for life. It's something that's innate to all of us. So I guess at the end of it all, maybe this is a video about dreaming and letting your dreams wander. And whether you achieve them or not, you'll know that you got to experience a few moments of beauty along the way. Because sometimes that's all we get. But it's a good thing to hold on to those.